"You're a useless child of failure," my father barked, his voice cold, sharp, and soaked in arrogance. The living room was packed with family, lawyers, and the smug air of finality. My brother, Calvin, stood beside him, grinning like he had already won. And maybe he had, or so they thought. My chest tightened. I stood still, frozen by the weight of a truth I'd carried for years, waiting for this very moment. "I'm giving everything to Calvin," my father announced to the room, holding the inheritance file like a trophy. "He deserves it more, you don't." Gasps rippled. My mother blinked, unsure whether to stop him or let it happen. My uncle looked away, uncomfortable. Only the lawyer sat still, his fingers gently curled over the edge of the folder on the table, silent, unreadable. I didn't move. I didn't plead. I didn't protest. My father leaned down with that same smirk I'd grown up resenting, signing the last page with a slow, satisfied stroke.
Done.
But just as he pushed the file across the table with a smug smile, the lawyer cleared his throat and said sharply, "Actually, there's something you need to know." The room went silent. My brother's grin faltered. My father narrowed his eyes. "What is this, Charles?" The lawyer opened a small envelope, sliding out a second document, yellowed slightly with time. "This was a sealed instruction from your late father, your father, Mr. Ramsey. He left a clause. One that overrides everything. My grandfather. The only man who had ever treated me like I wasn't a disappointment." The lawyer turned to me, then back to the room. "Your daughter, Lana, was named the rightful executor and majority beneficiary 5 years ago." The file slipped from my father's fingers. My brother's jaw dropped. "You're lying," Calvin blurted out, stepping forward. "No," I finally spoke calmly. "You just never thought to ask what Grandpa and I used to talk about during those walks after dinner. You thought kindness was weakness. Turns out, it's what Grandpa valued most." The lawyer nodded. "She owns 68% of the estate. That includes the vineyard, the antique house in Cape May, and the publishing shares. She's also the executor, which means she decides what happens next." My hands were still. My voice didn't shake. But my heart was finally free. And no one in that room saw it coming. My brother stumbled back like someone had punched him in the gut. "You can't do this." Calvin's voice cracked, his cocky facade shattering like glass underfoot. "She didn't earn it. She was just folding napkins at some hotel last year." The air grew heavier. "You're right," I said softly, looking him straight in the eye. "I was folding napkins, and checking people into rooms, and working doubles at the cafe to pay off Mom's hospital bills when you were too busy taking selfies on your yacht." The silence in the room was louder than any scream. My mother flinched. Her eyes, once filled with quiet disappointment, were now rimmed with something else, shame. The lawyer didn't flinch. "This decision is final. Mr. Ramsey had it notarized and witnessed. Lana has been legally in control of the assets for the past 4 years. She simply chose not to exercise her power until now." The moment felt surreal, as if time had paused to let them all sit in the weight of their misjudgment. My father stepped forward slowly, voice quieter now, almost forced. "Lana, sweetheart, let's talk." "I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," I said without bitterness. "But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for what's right. Grandpa trusted me because I didn't want anything, and that's exactly why he gave me everything. My words weren't revenge. They were truth. And truth, delivered gently, cuts deeper than rage ever could." I turned to Charles, the lawyer. "I'll be keeping the vineyard and the house. The publishing shares, I want to reinvest half into a fund for girls who want to study literature and journalism. Grandpa said dreams deserve legs." Charles smiled faintly. "He did say that." Calvin scoffed. "So, what, you're some hero now? You think that makes you better than us?" "No," I replied, turning to leave. "I think it just means I learned to stand alone when no one else would stand beside me." And with that, I walked out of the room. Behind me, I could hear my father calling my name, quieter, desperate. My mother whispering something unintelligible. Calvin slamming a door. But I didn't stop. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I was walking away in control. The hallway outside the estate room was quiet, lined with paintings I used to stare at as a child, portraits of ancestors who seemed to look down at me like I didn't belong. Funny how now, every frame felt like it was silently nodding in approval. I stepped outside. The sun had started to set, casting golden streaks across the sky, like the day itself was exhaling with me. Behind me, I heard fast footsteps, heels clicking in an erratic rhythm. Lana, wait. It was my mother. I paused but didn't turn around right away. Her voice had a weight to it, tired, unsure. So different from the woman who used to quietly stand by my father's side, never defending me, never questioning him. I didn't know, she said breathlessly, stopping a few steps behind me. I didn't know your grandfather had done that. He never told me. I finally turned, slowly. Her eyes were glassy. You didn't want to know, I replied gently. I told you once that he always asked me about my writing, that he said my heart mattered more than numbers. You laughed. Said I was being dramatic. She flinched. I was scared. Your father, he always made the decisions. I just followed. That's the thing, Mom, I said, voice soft but resolute. You followed while he crushed me. You watched when he mocked me. You stayed silent when Calvin spread lies about me. I wasn't just being pushed down. I was being buried alive, and you stood there with a shovel in your hand and looked away. Her lips trembled. I'm sorry, I exhaled. I believe you. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. She reached into her purse shakily and pulled out a folded letter. Your grandfather told me to give you this when the time came. I didn't know what he meant, but I think this is it. I took the letter with both hands, staring at the familiar, slightly shaky handwriting across the envelope. For Lana, only when they forget who she really is. Tears threatened to well up as I opened it slowly. Inside, Grandpa's words spilled out with the warmth I remembered so well. My dearest Lana, if you're reading this, it means they've finally seen what I always saw in you. The world will try to measure you with money, titles, or trophies. But I measured you with silence, because in silence, you were still kind. In darkness, you still lit candles for others. That's power. I gave you control not because you demanded it, but because you didn't. Use this moment not to punish, but to teach. With love, always.
Grandpa.
I closed the letter, my hands trembling. My mother was crying now, quietly, like she didn't know how to ask for a second chance. I didn't offer words. I just nodded once, slowly. It was enough. Because forgiveness is a process, not a performance. That night, I sat on the balcony of the estate I now owned, looking over the vineyard. The stars above me blinked into view, silent, ancient witnesses. I opened my laptop and began writing again for the first time in months. Not for revenge, not for proof, but for myself. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't writing to escape. I was writing because I had arrived. The next morning, the estate was quieter than I'd ever known it. Even the air felt still, as if the wind itself was waiting to see what I would do next. I stood at the head of the dining room table where, just yesterday, I had been treated like an invisible guest. Now the staff greeted me with cautious respect, their eyes watching for a clue. Was I going to become like the man who ruled before me? Or was something different beginning? I wasn't interested in power for power's sake. I was interested in healing. But healing often comes wrapped in uncomfortable choices. I asked Charles, the lawyer, to gather everyone back in the room by noon. Not to scold them, not to shame them, but because there were things that needed to be said, truths that had gone unspoken for too long. By 11:30, they began to trickle in. Calvin entered last, his steps slower than usual, his once proud posture visibly smaller. My father sat in the same chair he had occupied yesterday, but this time, he didn't speak first. I stood instead. I'm not here to take revenge, I began, scanning the faces of the people who'd overlooked me my whole life. I'm not here to humiliate anyone, though I'd be lying if I said yesterday didn't feel like justice. No one laughed. No one dared to. But I also believe that people are more than their worst moments, I continued. So here's what's going to happen. I took a deep breath. Calvin, you'll retain the lake house. Grandpa knew how much you loved it, even if he didn't trust you to manage his estate. You'll need to handle the property taxes and upkeep, but it's yours. My brother blinked, stunned. Why would you? Because spite doesn't build anything, I replied. But boundaries do. I turned to my father next. I will not be evicting you from this house. But from this day forward, you will no longer have control over the staff, the operations, or the finances. You may live here under one condition: respect. For everyone, including me. He looked down at his hands. Silent. Not proud. Just old. Older than I had ever seen him. And you, Mom? I faced her, voice gentler now. I'm offering you something better than an apology. I'm offering a chance. To be someone else. Someone better. You can be part of my life, but only if you start showing up. She nodded slowly, mouth quivering, holding back tears. Then I placed the final folder on the table, one that wasn't from Grandpa's safe, but one I had created myself. A foundation. The Ramsey Legacy Fund. For years, this family profited off a name that was respected in public, but cold behind closed doors. I'm going to change that. This fund will support women from small towns who want to study, build businesses, or heal from what they were told they could never do. I looked around. I want to build something that outlives all of us. No one applauded. They just listened. And sometimes, silence is more powerful than applause. I sat back down. Calvin stood up shakily. I don't get it. You had every right to throw us all out. Why didn't you? I met his gaze. Because Grandpa didn't raise me to burn down broken things. He raised me to rebuild them, with stronger hands and a softer heart. And for the first time, Calvin didn't argue. He nodded. Later that evening, as golden light poured into the windows, I walked the vineyard rows barefoot. The soil beneath me felt alive, like a whisper from the past rising through the roots. I paused at Grandpa's favorite bench, sat down, closed my eyes. This was not about revenge. This was about reclaiming every piece of myself they had tried to silence. Not loudly, but permanently. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet transformations, not the dramatic kind that made headlines, but the kind that mattered in the softest corners of life. The house began to shift. Rooms once filled with tension now echoed with footsteps of hope. I had the portraits in the hallway restored, not just of the men who ran the estate, but I commissioned new ones, of my grandmother, who raised 2 generations of strength behind silence, of the workers who'd been loyal to this land longer than my father had bothered to acknowledge. And yes, even one of Grandpa, not standing proudly, but seated with a notebook, smiling, as I remembered him best. But beneath all that change, I was changing too. Because the truth is, when you've spent your whole life being told you're not enough, you don't heal just because the world starts clapping. You heal when you learn to stop apologizing for existing. You heal when you stop needing permission to matter. And that's what I was learning to do, day by day. One afternoon, as the sun blazed high above the vineyard, a delivery arrived for me at the front gate. A simple box, no return address. I carried it into the study, sat down, and opened it slowly. Inside, neatly stacked, were dozens of old pages. Typed. Annotated. Yellowed by time. It was my writing. Stories I had written at 16, tucked away in Grandpa's old leather trunk. I didn't even know he'd saved them. On top was a note, written in his same steady hand. Lana, some voices aren't meant to be loud. Some are meant to be clear. Yours was always the latter. Don't let anyone convince you again that being quiet means being powerless. These stories are the beginning, not the end. Share them when you're ready. With all my love. Grandpa. I wept over that box like a child. Not because I was sad, but because I was finally free. Not just legally, not just financially, but spiritually. Months later, I published my first collection of stories under a small imprint I created through the publishing shares Grandpa left me. The book wasn't a bestseller. It didn't win awards. But the emails I received from women, strangers in small towns, young girls working night shifts, single mothers writing on napkins between shifts, those messages meant everything. Your story made me feel seen. I thought I was alone. I didn't know quiet girls could rise. That was the legacy Grandpa wanted me to carry. And I was doing it not through revenge, not through power, but through presence. Then one evening, as I sat alone on the porch, sipping tea, watching the horizon melt into gold and lavender, a familiar voice broke the stillness. Lana. I turned. It was my father. Older now, a bit hunched, hands clasped in front of him like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. His eyes didn't hold the same fire. Just the glow of something gentler, maybe even remorse. I wanted to say thank you, he said, standing awkwardly near the porch steps. For not turning your back. For not being like me. I didn't answer right away. Just studied him. The man who had once broken me with words sharper than knives, now standing there, stripped of pride. I gestured to the rocking chair beside me. He hesitated. Then sat. For minutes we said nothing. The silence was uncomfortable at first, then necessary. And eventually he spoke. Your grandfather was right about you. I nodded. I know. That night, I returned to the study and added a new line to the dedication in my manuscript. For the girls who were told they were too quiet to be great. For the women who were told they were too soft to lead. And for the child I once was. You were never useless. You were just unheard. Until now. And that was the real twist. Not a billionaire's secret. Not a courtroom shock. But a girl they all overlooked, who learned that kindness doesn't mean weakness. And silence? Silence can carry storms.
The metallic clang of the gymnasium doors echoed through the vast, empty space, breaking the eerie silence. Harsh fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Elena blinked awake, disoriented and cold. The first thing she felt was the coarse rope digging into her wrists, tied tightly behind her back. Her legs were similarly bound, her ankles tethered to the base of a pole in the center of the room. Glitter clung to her skin, shimmering mockingly under the harsh lights. Laughter rang out. Look who finally decided to wake up. Marcy's voice was shrill with amusement. Her face twisted into a smug grin as she leaned casually against the bleachers. Behind her, Jake and a few others snickered, their phones held up, recording every humiliating moment. What the hell? Elena's voice cracked as she tugged against the restraints. Panic surged in her chest, but she bit it down, refusing to show fear. Untie me. Ah, don't be such a buzzkill, Jake taunted, dumping another handful of glitter over her head. It caught in her dark hair, sparkling like a cruel halo. You always act so high and mighty. Consider this a reality check. The group erupted into laughter again, the sound sharp and merciless. Marcy crouched in front of Elena, her smile sickly sweet. You've been acting like you're better than everyone lately. Ignoring us, walking around like you're some kind of royalty. Well, guess what? You're not. Elena glared up at her, fire blazing in her eyes despite her vulnerable position. So, this is what you do when someone doesn't play your games? Tie them up and humiliate them? Pathetic. Marcy's grin faltered for a split second before she recovered, standing abruptly. Keep talking, princess. Maybe we'll post this online. Let everyone see the real you. Elena's heart sank at the mention of social media. She could already imagine the captions. Little Miss Perfect isn't so perfect now. The thought of becoming a viral laughingstock made her stomach churn. But she refused to let them see her break. You think this makes you powerful? She said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. It doesn't. It makes you cowards. Jake stepped forward, his face darkening. Say that again. Enough. Marcy cut him off, her tone sharper now. Let's wrap this up. We've made our point. But as they prepared to leave, the gym doors swung open with a bang. Elena? A deep, commanding voice rang out, freezing everyone in their tracks. The group turned in unison, their smug expressions replaced with wide-eyed fear. Standing in the doorway was a man in a tailored suit, his presence exuding authority and power. Behind him, 2 security guards flanked his sides, their stern faces promising swift consequences. "Dad?" Elena's voice was small, a mix of relief and disbelief. The man, Alexander Grayson, strode forward, his sharp gaze sweeping over the scene. He took in the ropes, the glitter, the mocking faces of the so-called friends, and his jaw tightened with barely contained fury. "Untie her. Now!" His voice was cold and deadly, each word slicing through the air like a blade. Marcy stammered, backing away. "We were just... Now?" Jake scrambled to comply, fumbling with the knots as the others stood frozen in shock. As soon as Elena was free, Alexander stepped forward, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softening just for her. She nodded, though tears pricked at her eyes. Alexander straightened, turning back to the group. The softness vanished, replaced by an icy rage that sent shivers down their spines. "You have no idea who you just messed with," he said, his voice low but filled with menace. The gym seemed to shrink under the weight of his words. "Security will escort you out," he continued, motioning to the guards. "And believe me when I say you will regret this. I'll make sure of it." The group was herded out, their protests and excuses falling on deaf ears. Marcy looked back once, her face pale and terrified, before disappearing through the doors. Elena sat there for a moment, her hands trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. Alexander knelt beside her, his expression softening again. "Let's get you home." She nodded silently, leaning on him as they left the gym. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over, and neither did they. The news of what happened in the gymnasium spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the entire school was buzzing. Some were horrified, others curious, and a few, those who'd never liked Elena, were disappointed they hadn't been there to witness it themselves. Marcy and her friends didn't show up to school. Rumors swirled about expulsions, lawsuits, and the wrath of Alexander Grayson, the man who wasn't just Elena's father but one of the most powerful business tycoons in the city. Elena, however, didn't bask in the chaos. She kept her head down, determined to move forward, but the stares and whispers followed her everywhere. "Did you hear? Her dad owns like half the companies in the state. No wonder Marcy's crew is screwed. I mean, what were they thinking? You don't mess with someone like her." Elena ignored them all, focusing on getting through her classes. But by lunch, she couldn't take it anymore. Retreating to the library, she sank into a corner chair, hoping for some peace. "Hey!" She looked up to see Caleb, a quiet boy from her English class. He wasn't someone she'd ever spoken to much, but his easygoing nature made him popular in his own way. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone sharper than intended. He held up his hands. "Relax. I'm not here to gawk. Just thought you could use some company." Elena hesitated but eventually nodded. Caleb sat across from her, placing his tray on the table. "So," he began, "you're basically a superhero now." She frowned. "What? Rich dad swooping in, saving the day. This kind of epic." Elena couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. It didn't feel epic. Caleb smiled, but his expression grew serious. "What they did was messed up. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm around." "Thanks," she said quietly, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Meanwhile, Marcy's world was crumbling. Her parents had been furious when the school called, detailing the incident and the potential legal consequences. Alexander Grayson had pulled no punches, threatening to press charges unless she and her friends faced strict disciplinary action. Jake had already cracked, spilling everything to his parents in a desperate attempt to shift the blame. Marcy, however, was left to grapple with the fallout. She sat in her room, staring at her phone. Messages flooded in, some from people condemning her, others from fake friends trying to distance themselves. How did it come to this? She wondered, tears streaming down her face. For years, she'd been the queen bee, the one everyone wanted to be or be friends with. But now all of that felt hollow. And then there was Elena, the girl she'd tormented out of jealousy and insecurity, who had faced her humiliation with more grace and strength than Marcy could ever muster. Marcy hated herself for what she'd done, but she didn't know how to make it right. The days passed, and things began to shift. Elena, tired of the constant whispers and stares, decided to take control of the narrative. During a school assembly, she stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. "I know everyone here has heard what happened," she began, her voice steady, "and I'm not here to relive it. But I want to say this, what Marcy and her friends did wasn't just about me. It was about a culture that lets people think it's okay to tear others down to feel powerful." The room was silent, every eye on her. "I'm not perfect," she continued, "but no one deserves to be humiliated like that. And if you've ever felt like you had to stay silent while someone else was being bullied, I'm telling you now, it's okay to speak up. It's okay to say no." Her words hung in the air, powerful and unyielding. Marcy, sitting in the back of the auditorium, felt a lump in her throat. For the first time in a long time, she saw Elena not as a rival, but as someone she wanted to be. The story of the gymnasium became a turning point for everyone involved. Elena found her voice, using her experience to advocate for change, while Marcy began a painful but necessary journey of self-reflection and redemption. By the end of the school year, the scars remained, but so did the lessons. For Elena, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving, turning her pain into power. And for Marcy, it was about proving that even the worst mistakes could lead to something better. Because in the end, it wasn't just about what happened, it was about what came next. As the summer break approached, Elena found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. The chaos, the humiliation, the sudden attention. It all felt surreal. But through it all, something inside her had shifted. She was no longer the quiet girl who let the world pass her by. No longer the girl who hid in the shadows, afraid of the spotlight. When she looked into the mirror now, she saw someone different. Stronger, more confident. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. The months of media attention had made her something of a local figure. Invitations to speak at youth groups, anti-bullying campaigns, and even charity events flooded in. At first, Elena had been hesitant. The idea of standing in front of large crowds terrified her. But her father, Alexander, was always there, offering quiet encouragement and reminding her that the world needed to hear her story. One evening, as they sat together in the large living room of their home, Elena spoke her mind. "Dad, I never asked for any of this. The spotlight, the attention. I just wanted to survive, to finish high school and go on with my life. But now, I feel like I have to do something bigger with all this. It feels like a chance to change things, but I don't know how." Alexander leaned forward, his eyes full of pride. "You already are changing things, Elena, by being yourself, by standing up when everyone else was sitting down. You've given hope to others who might have felt helpless. But this is your story now. You write the next chapter." His words lingered with her as she continued her work with the anti-bullying campaign, finding herself more and more involved in organizing workshops and speaking out. Each event gave her a sense of purpose, of empowerment. Every speech she gave was an act of defiance against the girl who once felt invisible, helpless, and weak. But with every step forward, there was always a shadow from the past, lurking just beneath the surface. Across town, Marcy sat in the dim light of her bedroom, a photo album open in front of her. She ran her fingers over the images of her and her friends, smiling in happier times, before the fallout. Her parents had gone quiet after the incident, their faces etched with disappointment. They hadn't scolded her as harshly as some might expect, but their silence had cut deeper than any harsh words could. Her life, once filled with social events and constant attention, had come to a standstill. She couldn't even bear to look at her friends anymore, the ones who had once been her closest allies. Jake had tried to reach out, apologizing profusely, but Marcy had shut him down. Her shame was too great. She couldn't face the people who had participated in tearing down someone like Elena. And then there was the deep, gnawing regret. She knew she had been cruel, but it wasn't until the whole school had turned its eyes on her, until the weight of her actions had been made so public, that she realized the full extent of the damage she'd caused. She had hurt Elena, But more than that, she had hurt herself. Marcy's identity had always been wrapped up in her social standing, her ability to manipulate others into giving her power. But now that power was gone. Her mother's voice broke through her thoughts. "Marcy, there's someone here to see you." Marcy's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. She stood hesitantly as the door creaked open, and there, standing in the doorway, was Elena. Marcy blinked, unsure if her mind was playing tricks on her. What are you doing here?" Elena took a step inside, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to talk. I know you probably didn't expect that." Marcy stood frozen for a moment, then motioned for Elena to sit. "I didn't think you'd want anything to do with me." Elena sat down slowly, her eyes never leaving Marcy's. "I don't know if I forgive you yet, but I've been thinking, and I realized that what happened, what you did, it wasn't just about me. It was about something bigger, something that needed to be addressed. Maybe it's time we both faced it." Marcy swallowed hard. "I can't even begin to apologize enough. I can't change what I did, and I don't even deserve forgiveness. I've been so selfish." Elena leaned forward slightly, her gaze softening. "You hurt me, Marcy, but you also hurt yourself. I think you know that. You lost something that was part of your identity, something that made you feel powerful. But you can rebuild yourself just like I did. I don't expect us to be friends, but I think it's important you understand that there's always a chance for change." Marcy's eyes welled with tears. "I don't know if I can ever make it right, but I'll try. I'll start with myself." Elena nodded, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "That's all anyone can do." As Elena stood to leave, Marcy called after her. "Wait." Elena paused, looking back. "You're stronger than I ever was. I hope you know that." Elena smiled, a real smile this time, the kind that radiated from the inside. "I think I do." By the end of the summer, the dynamics had shifted. Elena continued to speak out, her presence at school events a beacon for students who had felt voiceless. Her speeches, now filled with more personal reflection and calls for unity, resonated with everyone who had felt the sting of cruelty. Marcy, on the other hand, took a quieter approach to her redemption. She didn't seek out the spotlight. Instead, she focused on self-reflection, confronting her past actions and slowly rebuilding the trust of those she had hurt. Her relationship with Elena remained distant, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were no longer enemies. But for Elena, this wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It wasn't about getting revenge or seeing those who wronged her punished. It was about healing, growth, and using her voice to create change. She had been knocked down, humiliated, and broken. But now she was something else. Stronger, wiser, ready to face whatever the future held with the same resilience that had carried her through the worst moments of her life. In the end, the greatest lesson was clear. Sometimes the deepest pain leads to the greatest transformation. And for both Elena and Marcy, it was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The first notes of the piano surged through the grand hall like an uninvited memory breaking free. Lila's hands hovered over the keys, each stroke hesitant yet purposeful, as though she could coax the life back into the house with music alone. She wasn't hired to play, she knew that, but something about the forlorn instrument called to her, its silence begging to be broken. A shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. Startled, Lila turned to see Elijah Rhodes standing at the base of the sweeping staircase, his piercing eyes fixed on her. The chill in his gaze could have silenced her more effectively than words. "I don't recall giving you permission to touch that," Elijah said, his voice as sharp as the cold draft sneaking in through the heavy curtains. His presence was commanding, like the house itself had materialized into a man. I'm sorry, Mr. Rhodes." Lila stood abruptly, her heart racing. "I was just cleaning and thought." "Don't think." His tone cut through the air like a blade. "You're here to work, not to meddle." Elijah turned, his footsteps echoing in the vast space as he strode away, leaving Lila rooted in place. Her fingers still tingled from the brief moment they'd brought music back to the house, and though her pulse raced with embarrassment, her curiosity burned brighter. Who was Elijah Rhodes? And why did the piano's silence seem to weigh on him so heavily? The following day, the allure of the piano proved irresistible. Lila's hands grazed the keys once more, the soft notes weaving through the lifeless mansion. This time, she didn't even need to look up to know Elijah was there. His presence pressed against her like a storm cloud ready to burst. "If you're going to play," he said from the doorway, his voice quieter but no less commanding, "play something worth listening to." His words lingered even after he disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Lila to wonder. Was it the house she was trying to heal, or the man who seemed so tethered to its ghosts? From that moment, Lila knew she was walking a razor-thin line. Elijah Rhodes wasn't a man you crossed. His demeanor was as cold as the sea cliffs the mansion overlooked, and yet, the fleeting vulnerability in his eyes haunted her. There was something buried deep within him, something the piano, of all things, seemed to stir. The mansion itself reflected his solitude. Its vast halls were filled with faded grandeur, yet every corner was draped in neglect. Heavy curtains blocked the sunlight, casting shadows that seemed alive. Lila thought of the stories whispered in the nearby village, of the recluse who once had everything and now had nothing but silence. But the silence wouldn't stop her. The next time Lila sat at the piano, her fingers moved with more confidence, the melody flowing like water over stone. She played not for Elijah or the house but for herself. Music had always been her anchor, even when life felt like it was unraveling. She was so immersed that she didn't hear Elijah's approach. "You've been holding back." His voice startled her, breaking the spell. Lila turned sharply, finding him seated in one of the high-backed chairs by the fire. His posture was casual, but his gaze was anything but. It was like he was dissecting her, trying to understand what had brought her into his world. "I didn't think you liked the piano," she ventured cautiously, her voice trembling slightly. Elijah leaned back, the flickering firelight casting sharp angles across his face. "I don't. But I'd rather hear it played properly than butchered." It wasn't praise, but it wasn't a scolding either. Something about his guarded tone intrigued her. The man who barely spoke, who avoided the world, was staying in the room instead of walking away. Encouraged, Lila let her fingers find their place on the keys again. She began to play something softer, more melancholic. As the notes filled the space, she dared a glance at him. His eyes were closed, his expression uncharacteristically peaceful, as though the music had momentarily freed him from whatever shadows clung to his soul. When she finished, he opened his eyes but said nothing. The silence was heavier than before, but it felt different now, charged with something unspoken. "Why do you hate it?" Lila asked quietly, her fingers brushing the keys as if they might shield her from his wrath. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought she had overstepped. But then he exhaled, the sound laced with a weariness she hadn't heard before. "It's not the music I hate," he said finally. "It's what it reminds me of." Lila didn't push further. She simply nodded, as if to say she understood. But the truth was she didn't, not yet. All she knew was that this man, so hardened and unreachable, carried a pain so deep it seeped into every corner of the house. The next few weeks blurred into a strange rhythm. Lila worked diligently, cleaning and organizing the neglected mansion, but her evenings always ended at the piano. The melodies she played filled the air with something the house had been missing for years: life. And Elijah, despite his gruff demeanor, began to linger. Sometimes he sat silently by the fire, his eyes distant. Other times he would offer clipped comments about her playing, never kind but never cruel either. It was as if the music was drawing him out of whatever abyss he had retreated into. One rainy evening, the storm outside raged with a fury that made the windows rattle. Lila, undeterred, played a hauntingly beautiful piece that matched the tempest's mood. She didn't notice Elijah standing at the doorway until she finished. "That was her favorite," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. Lila turned to face him, her breath catching at the raw emotion in his eyes. This wasn't the cold, distant man she had come to expect. This was someone grieving, someone haunted. "Her?" Lila asked softly, not daring to push too hard. Elena, he said after a long pause. My wife. The words hung in the air like a confession, heavy with years of silence. Elijah crossed the room, his steps slow and deliberate, until he stood by the piano. His hand brushed against the keys, and for a moment, Lila thought he might play. But instead, he withdrew, his fingers curling into a fist. She used to play every morning, he continued, his voice cracking. This house felt alive then. Now it was a mausoleum. He didn't need to say it. Lila could feel the weight of his loss, the way it had consumed him and left him a hollow shell. You don't have to live like this, she said gently, standing to face him. Elena wouldn't want you to. His eyes snapped to hers, a flicker of anger flashing across them. Don't pretend to know what she'd want. I don't, Lila admitted, her voice steady. But I know what it's like to lose someone. And I know that shutting the world out doesn't make it hurt any less. For a moment, she thought he might lash out, but then something in him softened. He turned away, his shoulders slumping as though the weight he carried was finally too much. Why do you care? He asked quietly. Lila hesitated before answering. Because no one deserves to live in silence. Her words lingered long after she left the room, the sound of the storm outside the only thing filling the void. Over the following days, something shifted in the mansion. It was subtle at first, a curtain pulled back to let in the light, a chair by the fire no longer abandoned. Lila noticed the changes but said nothing. She simply played, her music threading through the house like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Elijah's presence grew less elusive. He began joining her in the evenings, sometimes sitting by the fire, other times standing near the piano as though debating whether to engage. The conversations between them, though sparse, became more open. Each exchange was like a cautious step across a crumbling bridge. One evening, Lila found herself lingering by the library after finishing her chores. The room, like much of the house, bore the weight of years of neglect. Dust coated the shelves, and the air smelled faintly of old paper. As she tidied the desk, her hand brushed against a small wooden box. Its lid was slightly ajar, revealing a stack of papers within. Curiosity tugged at her. Carefully, she opened the box and found sheet music, handwritten and unfinished. Beneath it were letters, their edges frayed from age. She hesitated, but a name on one envelope caught her eye, Elena Rhodes. Before she could read further, the door creaked open. Elijah stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. What are you doing? He asked, his tone low and controlled, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of vulnerability. I was just organizing, Lila stammered, stepping back from the desk. I didn't mean to pry. Elijah crossed the room and picked up the box, his movements slow, almost reverent. He held it for a moment, his fingers tracing its edges. She used to write music, he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the contents. Every note, every word. It was her way of making sense of the world. Lila watched him carefully. And you kept it all this time? I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, he admitted. But I couldn't look at it either. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words could have. Finally, Elijah set the box back down, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. You shouldn't have to keep running from it, Lila said softly. Her music could still bring something beautiful into this house. Elijah's lips pressed into a thin line. You don't understand, he said, his voice tight. Every note reminds me of what I've lost. And every silence does too, Lila countered, her tone gentle but firm. Maybe it's time to let the music heal you instead. For the first time, Elijah didn't argue. He simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible motion, and left the room. That night, Lila couldn't shake the image of Elijah holding the box, his pain so raw it was palpable. She sat at the piano, her hands trembling slightly as she began to play. The piece she chose was one of the unfinished compositions she had glimpsed in the box, pieced together by instinct and memory. The melody was haunting, filled with longing and love. It felt as though Elena herself were speaking through the keys. Her voice carried on the music. Lila played with her eyes closed, pouring every ounce of emotion into the piece. When she finished, the silence that followed was almost deafening. She opened her eyes to find Elijah standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "That was hers," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila nodded. "I wanted to bring it back to life." Elijah stepped closer, his eyes locked on the piano. For a moment, it looked as though he might say something, but instead he sat down beside her. His hand hovered over the keys before finally pressing one. The sound was hesitant, but it resonated through the room. "She used to play this for me," he said, his voice trembling. "It was her way of telling me everything she couldn't say with words." Lila didn't respond. She simply began to play again, guiding the melody until Elijah joined in, his notes clumsy but heartfelt. Together, they filled the mansion with music, the walls reverberating with life for the first time in years. From that night on, the house began to transform. Elijah opened the curtains, letting sunlight spill into the once dark rooms. Lila tended to the overgrown garden, reviving the roses that had withered under neglect. And each evening, they played together at the piano, the melodies weaving a bond neither of them could have anticipated. But healing wasn't linear. Elijah had his moments of withdrawal, days when the weight of his grief pulled him back into the shadows. Lila stayed patient, her presence steady and unwavering. She understood that some wounds took time to mend. One afternoon, as they walked through the now-blooming garden, Elijah spoke. "You've changed this place," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "And me," Lila smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're the one who chose to let it change." They stopped by the edge of the garden, where the sea stretched endlessly before them. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and roses, a bittersweet reminder of the past and a promise of what lay ahead. "Elena once told me that music could heal anything," Elijah said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I didn't believe her. Not until now." Lila placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "It's never too late to start healing." Elijah turned to her, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. For the first time, she saw not just a man burdened by loss, but someone ready to embrace life again. The days at the mansion grew brighter, not just from the sunlight now pouring in, but from the shared moments between Lila and Elijah. Their evenings at the piano became a ritual, each melody a step further away from the silence that had once suffocated the house. But as the mansion began to find its life again, so too did the tension between them grow. It was subtle, woven into the air like an unspoken melody. The way Elijah's gaze lingered a moment too long when Lila played. The way her heart quickened when their fingers accidentally brushed over the piano keys. Neither spoke of it, but it was there, undeniable. One evening, as Lila sat by the piano after finishing a lively piece, Elijah leaned against the doorway, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It was a rare sight, one she had come to cherish. "You're better than I gave you credit for," he said, his voice carrying a warmth she wasn't used to hearing. Lila grinned, brushing her fingers lightly over the keys. "High praise coming from you." Elijah chuckled, a sound so unfamiliar it startled them both. He walked over and sat beside her, his movements less guarded than they used to be. For a moment, they sat in silence, the space between them charged. "There's something I want to show you," Elijah said suddenly, standing and extending a hand. Lila blinked, her heart skipping at the unexpected gesture. "Where?" "You'll see," he said, a flicker of mystery in his eyes. He led her through the winding hallways of the mansion until they reached a door she had never noticed before. It was smaller than the others, unassuming, and when Elijah pushed it open, the scent of wood and varnish greeted her. Inside was a small room, its walls lined with instruments. Violins, cellos, flutes, and more, each one polished and placed with care. In the center of the room stood a single music stand, an empty chair beside it. "This was hers," Elijah said quietly, his voice tinged with reverence. "Elena's studio." Lila stepped inside, her eyes wide as she took in the space. The air felt different here, almost sacred. "It's beautiful. She used to spend hours here," he continued, composing, practicing, dreaming. After she died, I couldn't bear to come in. But I think it's time. Lila turned to him, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his expression. You've kept it just as she left it. He nodded. It felt wrong to change anything. But now, maybe it's time to bring it back to life, too. She walked to the music stand and found a sheet of unfinished notes resting on it. Gently, she picked it up. This is hers. Elijah nodded. She was working on it before. His voice faltered, but he quickly steadied himself. Before everything changed, Lila studied the notes, her mind already piecing together the melody. I could finish it, she said softly. If you'd let me. Elijah hesitated, his eyes searching hers. Finally, he gave a small nod. I think she'd like that. For the next few weeks, Lila dedicated herself to the piece. She spent hours in Elena's studio, letting the music guide her. Elijah often joined her, sometimes offering suggestions, other times simply listening. The process was slow, but it was healing for both of them. The day she played the completed piece for the first time, the mansion seemed to hold its breath. Elijah stood by the doorway, his hand resting on the frame as Lila's fingers brought Elena's final composition to life. The melody was haunting yet hopeful, a bridge between grief and renewal. When the last note faded, Elijah stepped forward, his eyes shining. She would have loved it. Lila smiled, her chest tight with emotion. It's not just hers anymore. It's ours. Elijah reached out, his hand brushing hers. The touch was brief, but it sent a spark through her, leaving her breathless. As the mansion continued its transformation, so too did their bond. The garden bloomed with roses once more, and the piano became a centerpiece of their shared evenings. But the closer they grew, the more Lila felt the weight of the unspoken words between them. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the waves crash against the cliffs, Elijah broke the silence. I never thought I'd find peace again, he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the sea. And then you came. Lila turned to him, her heart pounding. I didn't do anything special. You did more than you realize, he said, his gaze locking onto hers. You reminded me what it's like to feel alive. The intensity in his eyes was overwhelming, and for a moment, Lila thought he might kiss her. But instead, he looked away, the vulnerability slipping back behind his usual guarded expression. I don't know what happens next, he admitted, but I don't want this, whatever it is, to end. Lila reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. Then don't let it. The words were simple, but they carried a promise. One that neither of them was ready to break. Over the next few weeks, the mansion underwent a transformation that mirrored the changes between Elijah and Lila. The dark, suffocating silence that had once defined the house was replaced by music, laughter, and the gentle hum of life. Rooms that had been shut for years were opened, their windows letting in sunlight and sea breezes. The garden, now in full bloom, became a sanctuary where Lila and Elijah often spent their afternoons. Their bond deepened in ways neither could have anticipated. Lila no longer saw Elijah as the distant, grief-stricken man she had first met. He had begun to let go of the ghosts that had haunted him for so long, and in doing so, revealed a warmth she hadn't expected. Elijah, in turn, found himself drawn to Lila's resilience and kindness, her unwavering belief that even the most broken things could heal. But as much as they tried to live in the present, the shadow of the past lingered. One evening, as they sat by the piano after playing a duet, Elijah spoke, his voice hesitant. Lila, he began, his fingers lightly tracing the edge of the piano keys. There's something I've been meaning to ask. She looked at him, her heart quickening at the seriousness in his tone. What is it? He took a deep breath, as though steadying himself. You've given so much to this house, to me. But I need to know, what is it that you want? What dream did you leave behind to come here? The question caught her off guard. She had spent so much time helping Elijah rebuild his world that she hadn't stopped to think about her own. I used to dream of becoming a pianist, she admitted, her voice soft. But life had other plans. Elijah nodded, his expression thoughtful. And if you had the chance to pursue it again? Lila hesitated. I don't know. It feels so far away now. It doesn't have to be, he said firmly. You've already brought music back to this house. I think it's time you let it back into your life. The next morning, Lila woke to find a small envelope on the piano. Inside was a letter from Elijah, along with a pamphlet for a music academy in the city. Lila, you've spent so much of yourself helping me find my way back to life. Now it's your turn. The academy is ready to take you as a student, and I'll support you every step of the way. You've given me more than I could ever repay, but this is my way of trying. Elijah. Tears welled in her eyes as she read the letter. She hadn't allowed herself to hope for this, to dream again. When she found Elijah in the garden later that morning, she didn't know what to say. I can't accept this, she began, holding the letter tightly in her hand. Yes, you can, he interrupted, his voice firm but kind. You deserve this, Lila. More than anyone I know. But what about you? The house, she asked, her voice breaking. I can't just leave everything behind. Elijah stepped closer, his gaze steady. This house is alive again because of you, and so am I. But you don't belong here, not forever. You belong out there, chasing the life you've always wanted. Lila searched his eyes, finding nothing but sincerity. She knew he was right, but the thought of leaving him, of leaving the life they had built together, was almost unbearable. I don't want to lose this, she whispered. You won't, he said, taking her hands in his. This isn't an ending, Lila. It's a beginning for both of us. The day Lila left for the city was bittersweet. The entire village gathered to see her off, their well wishes and hugs a testament to the impact she had made. Elijah stood apart from the crowd, his usual stoic demeanor hiding the emotions swirling beneath the surface. As the car pulled up, Lila turned to him, her heart heavy. Thank you, Elijah, for everything. He smiled faintly, his eyes soft. You don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing. What? Don't forget what you've taught me. That even the darkest places can find light again. Tears threatened to spill as she nodded. I won't. He stepped closer, hesitating for only a moment before pulling her into a tight embrace. You'll always have a place here, Lila, no matter what. As she drove away, Lila looked back at the mansion one last time. It stood tall against the horizon, no longer the dark, desolate place it had once been. And though her heart ached, she knew this wasn't truly goodbye. Months passed, and Lila thrived at the academy. Her talent blossomed under the guidance of skilled instructors, and she found herself performing on stages she had only dreamed of before. Each time she played, she thought of Elijah, of the house, and of the journey that had brought her here. Elijah, meanwhile, continued to rebuild his life. He opened the mansion to the community, hosting music nights and charity events in honor of Elena's memory. The house, once steeped in sorrow, became a place of joy and connection. One evening, as Lila prepared for her first major concert, a familiar face appeared in the audience. Elijah sat in the front row, his eyes filled with pride as he watched her take the stage. Their eyes met briefly, and she felt a surge of emotion, knowing he had come all this way to support her. As she played, the music soared through the hall, weaving together the story of their journey, of loss, healing, and the bonds that refused to break. And in that moment, Lila knew that no matter where life took her, she and Elijah would always be connected.
The crowd at the local street fair bustled with energy, laughter mixing with the sizzling aroma of food trucks. Ava Novak squeezed through the throng, her eyes darting toward the far end of the park. She wasn't here for the fun. Her hands clenched around a crumpled note stuffed in her jacket pocket, a message she wasn't supposed to ignore. Her heart sank as she saw him, Marcus Hale, standing too comfortably under the glow of carnival lights. The man seemed to draw darkness to himself, despite the cheerful surroundings. Dressed sharply in black, he cut through the ambience like a blade. When their eyes met, he smiled, a predator's smile. "You're late," Marcus said as she approached, his voice calm, but with an edge sharp enough to slice through steel. "I had to work," Ava replied, matching his gaze though her stomach churned. She refused to show fear, even when every instinct screamed at her to run. Marcus gestured for her to follow. The festive atmosphere seemed to evaporate as he led her toward a quiet alley near the parking lot. "You know why I called," he said. Turning to face her, the casual tone of his voice a chilling contradiction to the menace in his eyes. "Your father made promises. Promises he couldn't keep. Now you're going to pay." Ava's blood ran cold, but she steeled herself. "I don't have anything left to give you." Marcus chuckled softly, leaning closer. "Oh, but you do, Ava. Your life, your choices, they're mine now." Ava's heart pounded as Marcus stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. She stood her ground, masking the fear clawing at her chest. "I don't owe you anything," she spat, hoping her defiance would mask her vulnerability. Marcus tilted his head, amused. "Oh, Ava, this isn't about what you owe me. It's about what you'll do to protect your precious little brother." Her breath caught. "Ethan has nothing to do with this." Marcus smirked, pulling out his phone. He swiped the screen and turned it toward her. Ava's stomach dropped as she saw Ethan, blissfully unaware, walking home from his job at the local grocery store. "You're lying," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound strong. "Am I?" Marcus pocketed the phone and leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You know I don't bluff. The boy's life is in your hands now. Work for me, or he won't have one." Ava felt trapped, the weight of the moment suffocating her. She clenched her fists, anger sparking beneath her terror. "What do you want?" Marcus stepped back, his grin widening. "It's simple. You're going to help me with a little business. No questions, no resistance. Do as I say, and your brother stays safe. Fail, and—" "Fine," Ava interrupted, her voice firm despite the lump in her throat. "I'll do it." "Smart girl." Marcus reached into his pocket, pulling out a small envelope. He pressed it into her hand. "Your first assignment. Do not open this until you're alone." Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Ava standing under the flickering light of the street lamp, her world spinning. Back at home, the silence of the Novak household felt deafening. Ethan had already gone to bed, blissfully unaware of the storm Ava had just stepped into. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope in her trembling hands. When she finally tore it open, her heart sank. Inside was a photograph of a man in his late 30s and an address scribbled hastily on a note. Underneath it were chilling instructions: get close, get the intel, report back in 3 days. Ava pressed her palm to her forehead, panic washing over her. She didn't know who the man was or why Marcus wanted her involved, but she couldn't refuse. Ethan's life hung in the balance. The next morning, Ava stood outside a nondescript office building, clutching a stack of resumes. She'd followed Marcus's instructions, applying for a temp job at the company where the man from the photo worked. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was a bad idea, but she couldn't think of another way out. The receptionist gave her a once-over and gestured for her to wait. Minutes later, a tall man with sharp features and a confident stride approached her. It was him, the man from the photo. "Ms. Novak," he asked, extending a hand. "I'm Julian Gray. We've been reviewing your application, and I think we could use someone like you on our team." Ava forced a smile, shaking his hand. The warmth of his grip felt at odds with the cold dread in her stomach. "Thank you," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'm ready to start right away." Little did Julian know, Ava's presence in his life wasn't by chance. Over the next 2 days, Ava's unease grew. Julian was nothing like she expected. He was kind, approachable, and deeply invested in his work, which seemed to center on social outreach programs. The more she learned about him, the less he fit the mold of someone who would be on Marcus's radar. But Ava's orders were clear. She was to monitor him, gain his trust, and deliver information back to Marcus. On the 3rd day, Marcus called. Well, his voice was as sharp as ever. "There's nothing," Ava said quickly. "He's harmless. Just a businessman." There was a pause. Then Marcus's tone turned icy. "Don't lie to me, Ava. Everyone has secrets. Find his, or Ethan pays the price." The line went dead, leaving Ava feeling more trapped than ever. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Every moment with Julian replayed in her mind, each one gnawing at her conscience. She knew she had to make a choice. Either she would betray an innocent man, or she would risk her brother's life. As dawn broke, Ava's resolve hardened. She wasn't going to let Marcus control her life any longer, but defying him meant walking a razor's edge. And the stakes had never been higher. The following day, Ava arrived at Julian's office earlier than usual. She had spent the night devising a risky plan, one that could expose Marcus without endangering Ethan. But first, she needed to know why Marcus had targeted Julian. Julian greeted her with his usual warm smile. "Morning, Ava. You're here early. I wanted to get a head start," Ava replied, forcing a cheerful tone. She clutched her notebook tightly, concealing the unease bubbling under her calm exterior. As the hours passed, Ava carefully sifted through files while keeping an eye on Julian. His phone buzzed periodically with calls and messages, and she noted how his expression darkened during one particular conversation. "I told you, I'm not backing down," Julian said, his tone firm. "The project stays on track." Ava leaned closer, pretending to adjust the papers on her desk, and caught fragments of his conversation. Phrases like community funding and land dispute hinted at something much bigger. By lunch, Ava had pieced together enough to suspect that Julian's work was interfering with Marcus's interests. But why would Marcus send her instead of dealing with him directly? Her thoughts were interrupted when Julian approached her desk. "Everything okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Ava hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just try and keep up with everything." "You're doing great," Julian said, his voice softening. "If you need help, just ask." For a moment, Ava saw the genuine kindness in his eyes, and guilt gnawed at her. She couldn't let him become another victim of Marcus's schemes. That evening, Ava slipped out of the office with her bag packed and her plan set in motion. She knew she needed an ally, someone who could help her take down Marcus. Her first thought was Liam Cross, an old friend of her father's who had once worked as a private investigator. Liam's office was a cluttered mess of case files and coffee-stained papers. He looked up from his desk as Ava entered, his sharp eyes narrowing in surprise. "Ava, haven't seen you in years. What's going on?" She hesitated, then spilled everything. The threats, Marcus's hold over her family, and her suspicions about Julian. Liam leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "Marcus Hale. That name alone gives me a headache. Can you help me?" Ava asked, desperation lacing her voice. Liam nodded. "I'll see what I can dig up. But you need to be careful, Ava. Marcus isn't the kind of man you cross lightly." Over the next few days, Ava played her part at Julian's office while secretly working with Liam. The more she uncovered about Marcus's operation, the clearer the stakes became. Marcus wasn't just extorting Ava. He was using her as a pawn in a much larger game. Liam discovered that Marcus had been pressuring local businesses to sell their land for a shadowy development project. Julian's refusal to comply made him a target. One night, Ava received a call from Liam. "I've got proof," he said. "Financial records, deals gone bad. Everything that ties Marcus to his crimes. But it's not enough. We need something bigger to nail him." Ava's mind raced. The only way to truly bring Marcus down was to get evidence directly from him. It was dangerous, but she was out of options. The next time Marcus called, Ava was ready. "Did you find what I asked for?" he demanded. "I found something better," Ava replied, keeping her voice steady. "Julian's on to you. He's planning to expose everything." There was silence on the line, then a low chuckle. "Is that so? Then I guess it's time I paid him a visit." Ava's stomach churned. She had just set the final phase of her plan into motion. That night, Marcus's black SUV pulled up outside Julian's office. Ava watched from the shadows as Marcus and two of his men entered the building. Her heart raced as she texted Liam, "He's here. Be ready." Inside, Marcus confronted Julian, his demeanor cold and threatening. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long," Marcus said, his voice dripping with malice. Julian stood his ground. "I'm not afraid of you, Marcus. You can't bully everyone into submission." Ava slipped into the building, her phone's camera rolling as she recorded the encounter from the hallway. Liam had alerted the authorities, but it was up to her to make sure they had irrefutable evidence. The confrontation escalated as Marcus revealed his true intentions, detailing his plans to strong-arm Julian and take control of his projects. Ava's heart pounded as she captured every word. But just as Marcus turned to leave, one of his men spotted her. "She's recording," he shouted. Marcus's eyes darkened as he stormed toward her. "Ava, you little—" Before he could finish, the sound of sirens filled the air. Liam had delivered on his promise. Marcus and his men were arrested that night, their operation exposed for all to see. Ava handed over the footage, knowing it would seal his fate. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of freedom. Julian, though shaken, thanked her for her courage. "You didn't have to risk yourself for me," he said. Ava smiled faintly. "Sometimes you have to fight for what's right." The fallout from Marcus's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. His empire crumbled, and Ava was finally free from his grasp. She and Liam worked together to ensure Ethan's safety, and for the first time in a long while, their family could breathe easy. As Ava stood on the steps of the courthouse, watching Marcus led away in handcuffs, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had faced her fears and emerged stronger. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new chapter.